not to go back to Zelda, but in another way, Zelda is kind of like Nintendo Ponniyin Selvan. So, you really delve deep into.
Oh, wow. Let's put that at the top of the episode so we hook the video game nerds.
And then lose them by calling them video game nerds.
Yeah.
The very specific Venn diagram of Ponniyin Selvan, Mani Ratnam fans, Ponniyin Selvan, and Tears of the Kingdom.
Video game enthusiasts.
Connoisseurs.
Right.
I mean, Tears of the Kingdom kind of would work as a subtitle for part 2.
Oh,
that's true.
Ponniyin Selvan, Tears of the Kingdom.
Royal people doing a lot of crying.
Mm-hmm.
And dying. And lying. All right. Thank you for listening to Deep Cut.
I'm Wilson Lai.
I'm Benjamin Yap.
I'm Eli Sands.
And I'm Thanmye Lagudu.
And you're listening to Deep Cut.
On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We also discuss that director's life and career to bring context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to.
Before we get into our discussion on Ponniyin Selvan Part 2, please rate and review us because that helps us keep making the show. Be sure to subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our next episode drops. And you can keep up with us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd at Deep Cut Pod. Join us to talk about movies on our Discord server, to which you'll find a link in the description. I'm going to put a disclaimer. I just recovered from COVID. That's why I sound like I'm dying.
Poor Wilson. Poor Wilson.
So please bear with my voice as I try to expound, I don't even fucking know if that's a word, my love for this new movie. Welcome to our second Deep Cut Upkeep episode on Mani Ratnam. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the only director that we've covered 2 new releases from.
Yeah.
So far, yeah.
So Deep Cut Upkeep is a continuing series that we're doing where we cover new releases from directors we've covered previously on the podcast. And you can check out our episode with Thanmye that we released in November last year, covering the first part of this epic historical 2-parter, Ponniyin Selvan Part 1, where I guess Ben, Eli, and I were a little bit less enthused about, and you can listen to us try to work our heads around Ponniyin Selvan Part 1. Today, Mani Ratnam has finally concluded his big white whale with the release of Ponniyin Selvan Part 2, which just came out earlier this month, and all 4 of us had the pleasure to see this in theaters, and we're just going to jump right into it. We're going to jump right into initial reactions. I'm going to let our dear guest Thanmye go first. Thanmye, over to you. What did you think?
Hey guys. Also, thanks for having me on again. I'm happy to be here as always, and of course talk about Mani Ratnam, which is what I do all the time, and I have a platform to do it, and I love doing it. So one thing I will say is that I think for the future, you guys need to bring me onto an episode where I'll hate whatever you're because I feel like I've basically liked everything. Like, tell me the day you start doing an episode on like Trey Edward Schultz or something. I have many thoughts.
That day will be never.
Yeah.
I doubt that's gonna happen.
So like, yeah, I liked it. Shocker, right? It's, so I went to see it opening weekend. I didn't see it that Friday, but I saw it that Saturday with a couple of friends. And then with the first movie, when we talked about it last time, I also had my reservations about the film. I had a lot of questions about certain decisions and stuff, but I think with this movie, it really kind of... So here's the thing. I think like I've gone past this idea of like perfect cinema or whatever that's supposed to be, right? I think that like whenever something like really kind of impacts you, and maybe there are flaws, but if a movie gets to a place where there's so much really like amazing stuff that you kind of feel and you resonate with, all that stuff kind of fades away. And I think Ponniyin Selvan 2 is one of those movies where I was just so kind of enraptured the whole time. And I just like understood like what Ratnam was going for. More so, I think, in this part than the first part. Needless to say, I think this is Ratnam's best film since Ravannan, hands down. And I think a lot of that has to do with this kind of core tragic romance he sets up, which I feel is just so brilliant. I think what he does here. And yeah, overall, I think it's amazing. I think it's brilliant. I'm not going to say it's like a masterpiece, but it is something that I think by the end, really thinking about certain scenes and stuff, I just like really couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop thinking about certain sequences and like large stretches of the film. So yeah, I'm a huge fan. And I think this is his best film since Ravenant. So
That's awesome, Thanmye. And honestly, well, I don't know if I should just go. I think I'm going to go because I would piggyback off of your love of this film. And if you remember, I wasn't really hot on PS1. I felt like there were too many characters. I feel like the dialogue was just very expository in a way that I was not really being swept away by the emotions of it. But that really turned around in PS2. I feel like it makes sense that PS1 was all this setup, and now we have these really established relationships and these really established characters. And I think Ratnam is just directing at a much higher level here. He is really like moving the camera extremely well. His blocking's just like on the moon. Like it's just not on this planet anymore. I think like there are so many sequences in this where he's just finding really, really inventive ways to show character relationships like breaking or forming. It just feels like filmmaking in its like top form for him.
100%.
And I think it's really aided by a more simple plot this time. I think Nandini becoming the real main antagonist of this and hatching a plan to kill the cholas, the three big cholas at the same time, I think makes it easier to follow. And starting off with having the three siblings come together and then go off in their own ways is, I think, just a much better way to start a through line through the whole film. And then you have these really, really, really powerful, impactful scenes like the Vandya meeting Kundavai again when he's blindfolded. That's just iconic. Nandini and Karikalan, that scene, we will just talk at length about this scene later, but I just want to bring it in forward now. And also the father with Mandakini and that final like fatal meeting is just like, I think just the combination of all those scenes like honestly make this one of like Ratnam's best work, I think. And
yeah, it's in my top 5 Ratnam, easy. I think after watching this, it took me a while to kind of think about where does this rank. I think this is pretty smoothly, I think, in my top 5.
Yeah, I think it's also in my top 5. And I saw this with another like sold out crowd. And this was opening night in Hong Kong, which was unfortunately a week later than everyone else's opening night. But everyone was so into it. I think I just felt really involved this time, and I felt really attentive, and I felt very emotionally moved by it. And yeah, what can I say? I'm just such a big fan of Ratnam and his direction. And yeah, like sometimes he's just directing at a level that no one else comes close to. Okay, Eli?
Yeah, I also saw this in the theater. I saw it in IMAX again.
Whoa.
So I was ponying up the dough to see this on the big screen.
Yes.
Joke that I've had prepped for about 10 minutes. Sorry. And when we talked about Ponniyin Selvan 1, I had bemoaned that Ratnam's camera direction, which in other movies was very inventive and vivacious, was kind of dialed back, and I believe I even compared it to Marvel kind of pat camera style.
Yeah, you did.
But here, I totally agree with Wilson that it feels much more creative and willing to do unusual things to stage action, to show character relationships. And the cinematography, too, feels a little bit more natural. It feels like maybe the team kind of clicked a little bit better technically here. I likewise agree with Thanmye that the things that stick with me are a couple of really standout scenes, that the death of Mandakini in particular, and that climax with Aditya and Nandini as well. Those are really remarkable scenes. I will say that a couple of the biggest moments to me were actually things that later turned out to not be what happened, specifically when Vandya Tevan is knocked unconscious in the climax. I thought he was killed, and that moment got the biggest reaction out of me because he's our audience surrogate character, and he's very charming. And I was like, no, they killed him. But then he gets up a moment later, and I was kind of confused. So to that point, I think that even though the plot is simplified, it does sometimes get in its way with explanation that holds it back from the emotional highs that it achieves elsewhere. But to Thanmye's point, those emotional highs are really convincing and very involving and just more creatively staged and blocked, especially camera blocking. Yeah. So I enjoyed it.
I'm with you, Wilson, that like I think the setup in part 1 allows part 2 to work much better because you already know the relationships and it's easy to keep track of what's going on because you don't need to learn how everyone fits together. In a similar way to like TV, I guess, where like you go into an episode without having to understand how the characters relate to each other. And I think part 2 has that advantage, but whereas part 1 had the burden of having to teach you all the characters and all the relationships, which was a big ask for a movie of this size and a story of this size. And I think that's one of the main reasons why part 2 is able to be, I think, markedly better for me than part 1, because it is able to go right into payoffs and I was much less confused. Also because I read a lot of articles before going in to like make sure I knew what was going on and like it was way less confusing. But I also think that the story was also simplified in that sense that you were talking about, Wilson, where like it's simple what has to happen and who the villain is and what the plot is, like the villain's plot is and what has to be done to stop it. And then each of the 3 siblings, the protagonists, you know what they're doing in each part of their story after they meet up and then they like split up again. And yeah, I think the direction is really good in some of these scenes. Like I think the scenes you pointed out are exactly the scenes I'm thinking about as well, Wilson, that are like stick in my mind. However, I still think there needs to be like 3 more movies for this to like really work.
I did think about that.
Yeah, like I think it still feels a little overstuffed, wanting to do all the things that happens in the novel or like try to cover as much story as possible. And because of that, there is a feeling that it rushes through certain parts of the story. And like, I wish there was just more time to breathe. And like certain plot lines feel a little bit underserved because of the speed at which you are going through all the different journeys. I think chief among them might be Kundavai's journey feels a little bit truncated. I think about how she learns about Nandini's past by first talking to her dad and then it's like, oh, she's my sister. And then you could have held on to that kind of belief and then gone into like something else. But then like immediately after it's like, oh, she's not your sister. Like immediate scene after that reveal is unrevealed and then a new reveal which tells you the truth, which felt like a very strange way of giving a twist. It was like, here's a twist, but that twist is wrong. Here's the actual twist. And I was like, okay, then maybe just cut the first part. So like I found like parts of that like kind of strangely structured from a general standpoint. And like that's a scene where it's like still a lot of exposition through speaking that was a bit less interesting. And Kundavai was such a highlight, I felt, for PS1 that I felt a little bit disappointed in like she didn't really get to do as much in PS2.
Right.
Which felt like a shame. I think Vikram's Karikalan, he had a few big scenes in part 1, but I think in part 2, like he really like stuck out to me as like being such an incredible actor.
Totally.
Brilliant. He's amazing.
Yeah.
And like the scenes that he's in, he really is really good in those scenes, like almost to a point of like overshadowing like the other actors in those scenes.
Oh, definitely.
Like kind of ridiculous.
And here's the thing, Ben.
Yeah.
Vikram is the second best performance in the movie, right? And he's giving his career best performance. And the number one, you know, obviously, in my opinion, is Aishwarya Rai Bachchan, right?
Right.
Which we'll get into, but still.
I disagree, but I think Aishwarya Rai is also really good at this. Yeah, like I really was quite blown away by Vikram's performance. I don't really have a good reason why or like why I rank it that way, but it's just kind of like how I feel about it. But I think there's just something very compelling about the way that he plays anger and he plays that kind of duality of Karikalan and like how he's angry but also like almost resigned to his death from like the first minute.
Oh God.
He's like a Kendall Roy.
You know what really helps in part 2 that I kind of wish had been in part 1 is the whole opening that shows the past between Aditya and Nandini.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Oh, the flashback is so good.
It's amazing.
It's essential emotional information that informs those performances later on. And I believe in your Letterboxd review, Thanmye, you wrote that this one really congeals around that tragic romance between Aditya and Nandini as the core of the movie structurally.
Yeah.
And I totally agree. I think it's a great organizing principle. And again, that flashback opening is essential to imbue those performances with massive scale fate and star-crossedness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder, like, if that flashback was the opening of PS1,
I wonder.
right? Like, I feel like I would have understood PS1 way more. Because I think I was a bit confused in PS1 about the relationships and, like, what is important here? What is important to Kari Colin?
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
But with that flashback in PS2, I was like, oh, I freaking get it now. Like, now I understand what's going on.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's also par for the course for Mani Ratnam because he likes to do these, like, middle of the story flashback.
Right.
Of course.
Like, I remember in Kanatil Mutamital, like, the flashback informs what is going on. You're a little confused, and then the flashback crystallizes the information so that you understand, oh, this is the game. And I know he likes to do that. And in a way, the flashback being the start of PS2 is the middle point of the story, right? So it makes sense that way. But I do wonder, like, if it had been the opening, would it have improved the experience for me for PS1?
Yeah.
And then, like, throughout PS2 as well.
And Ratnam doesn't only like it's not just a delayed flashback, but it's also this thing where he adds this essential emotional information that clarifies stuff from before,
Sure.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Where when you catch it on the rewatch, you're able to be like, oh, that's why, right? So like when you watch that, and you know, I kind of think that opening flashback in PS2 is largely from Nandini's perspective. And I think he tries to kind of structure it around her subjectivity, which I think is not immediately obvious, but I think there's a lot of like specific things in there that kind of indicate you to kind of think that way, because you get similar images from that flashback in that kind of like interval sequence of PS1, but everything is kind of filtered through Kari Colin's subjectivity, right? Like, you know, where, you know, for example, like there are shots that are not even in the same scene that are kind of put together the way that like you would remember something, right? In his madness, in his kind of state. But then you get the opening where you see it largely from Nandini's perspective, right? Like, for example, when the young Kari Colin goes off to war, you don't go off with him to war. You stay with Nandini in the temple, right? While she waits for 2 years, right? And this starts, I think, an interesting thing in the rest of the film where it's like, Ratnam doesn't just want Nandini to just be like a villainess, right? He wants her to be somebody who's like incredibly well-rounded. She's like the Ratnam hero that's kind of has her own motivations, but he gives her a level of empathy, I think.
Right.
I think that's like the goal
Definitely.
with that flashback. And I mean, to the point where I think it clarifies information. You start to see like that scene in PS1 where Kundavai and Nandini have their big face-off in the palace. You start to understand why Nandini has that bad blood with Kundavai, right? Like when she was young, she treated her like a king or like a princess would treat someone else, like this, like royals,
Like a toy.
right? And Ratnam loves to do this stuff where you see a scene and you don't know exactly what to make of it in the moment, or there's maybe some kind of base level kind of involvement, and then he deepens that with information that he reveals later. It's up to you, the viewer, to figure that out, right?
Right.
To me, that makes me think of one of the classic principles of melodrama, right? Which is the concept of too late, or if only we could have changed this sooner. And learning important emotional information later on gives me, as the audience, a very helpless feeling of, oh, but I didn't understand. Like, if I had understood, then I might have rooted differently, which ultimately doesn't change the plot, but it gives you a feeling of regret about how you identified with a character or related to a character earlier on. And now you feel this after the fact kind of longing to have understood and felt this thing fully that now is tinged with that kind of regret. And you're perhaps that much more invested because of it. Did that make any sense?
No, it makes sense.
That made a lot of sense.
Definitely.
I think it's just tough for me because I still think of like when I think about the way that we experience film being like a linear time kind of thing. And I get that you can put things together in your head, even as you're watching, but also like after the film to like understand things. But I think because film is such a immediate experiential medium that like it really depends on the way that you structure that delayed flashback. But sometimes like without that information, I do feel like it was too confusing in PS1 where like there was a murkiness to the motivations of the characters without that essential emotional information.
Yeah. Nandini was definitely like more enigmatic. Like she's just, you can't read her.
It was more confusing for me. I think like I was like, okay, she's the villain, but like I don't know what her deal is. throughout PS1.
Also, the thing that makes that a harder sell is that we're not just spending time getting to know the characters' personalities in a kind of low key or casual way, but there's a lot of plot movement and a lot of big decisions being made. And because we don't know the emotional information that feeds into those decisions, it feeds into that feeling of moving at a rushed pace because we don't have an emotional understanding of why those decisions are being made until later in the story.
Right. And I also do think that it's maybe Ratnam himself having to contend with what he's interested in the story and what like Kalki has written in the source material. And I feel like there's a struggle there when trying to translate, especially a novel of this breadth to like just film. Like that's why some novels are just like meant to just be novels and it's just hard to translate to film. But I think Ratnam is very clear that he thinks that the Nandini Karikalan relationship is the heart of this film, but like even that gets resolved in PS2 like maybe a good 30 minutes before the end of the movie, and the actual conclusion to the film is sort of just presented as not a dud, but I'm like like we've already reached the emotional climax of this, like, but I'm sure like when Kalki was writing this, he was like, oh my god, let's just play political intrigue for like chapters upon chapters.
Yeah, and largely why I think PS2 works, at least for somebody who like is really interested in Mani Ratnam's filmography, is that you start to see those Ratnam preoccupations and those things that he has had since the beginning of his career, right? Like that's the stuff that you can sink your teeth into, that you're like, oh, right. Like, of course he focuses on the doomed romance, like totally, right? Like, it's, it makes sense, you know? And I think like in a lot of ways, that scene feels like the thematic kind of climax and conclusion to the film, right? In a way where, you know, I don't know if Ratnam is necessarily like consciously like, I want to pay more attention to this than this, but I think it just sort of happened in the way he sort of put it together, right? And I'm sure he wasn't consciously being like, this is the one that I really want to focus on. I just think he was able to kind of get a lot out of this particular interest that he had, and kind of similar things that he's kind of followed through his filmography. I think that's what makes this part so much more emotionally involving, and just like, you know, I think like so much more to dig into for like people who are interested in Ratnam as a filmmaker, right? And not just fans of the book, right? Like that's the, you know what I mean? I feel like PS1 is an introduction to Kalki's world with kind of the craftsmanship of Ratnam, right? But this is Mani Ratnam's Ponniyin Selvan, right? PS2, right? And that's kind of the way that I see it. And like you said, Wilson, I think I understand kind of what he was trying to do with those last sort of 20 minutes or so, but a lot of that feels very inconsequential, or sort of like he had to put it or whatever, you know.
Wait, can we clear the air? Why did Ponniyin Selvan just give out? Like, can we just talk about that?
I get it. It's a noble act of, I don't need the crown right now. There's someone more senior who is in line and rightfully deserves this. Okay. It's a noble gesture that's made to get us to root for Ponniyin Selvan. But when it happened and he gave the crown to the other person, my reaction was, who?
I mean, the whole point is that Arumori is such a noble person that he is not hungry for power, right?
Yeah.
And the whole story of PS in general is that Rajaraja Chola is one of the best kings of all time, right? He's like the GOAT. So I think this is one of the ways to like show him to be the GOAT. And then like, I think that article that you shared, Thanmye, about the things that were left out from Ratnam's movies is that the person that he crowns is not the person that he crowns in the movie, right? And it's just kind of like funny because when he crowns the villain of the story who is trying to assert power from the Cholas, it's a very odd thing that happens in the story. Whereas in the book, he crowns somebody who takes on the same name as that character, who is not that character. So it's not so weird that...
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and actually the person he crowns is a flower seller who is secretly...
Oh, that's better. Why didn't they do that?
Yeah, so, but there's no time. There's no time.
But it would have been just like 10 more scenes to add.
There's 10 more movies.
So make more movies. I'm here for it.
If you didn't read the article, the flower seller is the true king, and then he marries the boat girl.
Yeah, Pungujali.
So she becomes queen. That's like a whole thing.
I love that. I wanted more from her. I just
me too.
wanted more from both of them. They're so good.
Yeah, they're great characters, and as is, it feels like their presence is a little vestigial. Like it's a salute to the characters, but they don't factor into the climax in any sense.
Yeah. They're like fan servicey scenes, but there's just no time.
I think it was probably his way to kind of keep everything a little dialed down and coherent, right? Like in the sense that like, you know, this is a character that you kind of understand what his motivations are, what he wants to do. And you can kind of bounce off that Ponniyin Selvan is noble and he sees the capacity for change in him and wants to honor that and whatever, right? Like, I think maybe Ratnam's intention was to kind of dial it down, right? Not just be like, we're going to give it to, you know, Sandhanam, who's like, we've gotten 2 scenes with him or whatever, you know? I think like that was the intention behind it. Whether or not it lands is like, you know, up to discretion, but.
Yeah. And you can sort of see him dialing back on the evil on Mandurantakan in this film because he's like, oh, I'm just taken along for the ride and everyone else is doing the scheming and you're just going to promise me king at the end, right? And everyone's like, yeah.
But he was fully bad in the first movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I mean, like they put him in the fight so that he gets to like be a hero. So then it feels like, oh, you know, he actually is on the side of the Cholas and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So I think they do enough to like make it make some sense. Like, to make it make sense, actually. It does make sense. And it's a good truncation of the story where it's not super confusing.
Eli's still like, who is this man?
No, right now I'm thinking about how. So I think Wilson said that the resolution of the Aditya Karikalan and Nandini relationship happens like 30 minutes before the end of the movie.
Yeah.
The battle feels a little bit obligatory and the reasoning for it feels somewhat threadbare. It's cool that we have a battle and I see how it makes Madhurantaka come off as more noble ultimately, but they could have just given Vantiyatevan a chance to explain, not to poke plot holes, but...
Let's talk about the death of Karikalan, because that's really what triggers the war, right?
Yes.
I think that's the scene that we need to talk about.
We do need to talk about it.
Oh, my God.
You know what? I'm actually going to propose...
Yeah, sorry, go.
Well, now I want to hear what that was about.
No, I'm just thinking about the scene.
We could build up to it, really tease our listeners by talking about...
Talk about other scenes first.
Mandakini's death first.
Mandakini's death first?
Well, we can just talk about it now.
Yeah, okay, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Oh my God. Him begging her to fucking kill him is like, oh my fucking God. It's just like gut wrenching. Like, I just felt everything that Vikram was giving to me in that scene. It was incredible. And the way the camera just circles around them and the fires raging behind them. And it's like Ratnam, I said this in my review of his very, very early work, Gitanjali, that I saw before PS2. But I'm like, Ratnam is like the only director that I know that like uses natural forces in just such a visceral kind of way to reflect emotions going on with the characters in the scene. And like this scene with the fire raging in the background is like the prime example of this in this film. And it's just one of his calling cards and he just does it so well. And it's like, you can count that as like one of, like, you have editing, cinematography, like directing, and also natural forces as part of Mani Ratnam's like roster of things that he uses. But it's just so incredible, this scene, and both their acting and both their faces in this scene is absolutely devastating. It's just it's the best. It's really, really one of the best scenes that he's ever done.
Yeah. When I watched the movie the first time, I started crying. I was like, this is, I don't know why. There was something so kind of emotionally explosive about the scene. It's so, just the way he decides to block the characters and like the sword and all these things and like what they're saying, you know, like what Vikram's just like total like just like desire to not live anymore is just so, sorry, I'm laughing, but it's like because this is like what Ratnam does best, right? Is this type of scene. It's like where all the tension's been building up and it kind of explodes in a way that you don't necessarily fully think that's how it's going to happen, but he's able to really just like bring the viewer through those like 10 odd minutes that it is, right? It's like it's brilliant. It's you know, the way he stages it, the way there's like different layers of action, right? And you know, you have that centerpiece and then you have people behind, and then the shot choices, like that incredible two shot that he just stays on with their two close-ups where they're just talking to each other is just like, you know, what filmmaker would do that, you know, just to let the performances breathe, and you're so close to them, right? Yeah, it's brilliant. It's one of his best scenes, I think. It's like top 5 Ratnam scenes, I think. It's next level. It's like what he does best in its most crystallized form. And my theory about the scene is that it's a reworking of the Dilse climax.
Yes, I'm thinking about that as well.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it feels like a scene where an immovable force meets an unstoppable force, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Unstoppable force meets an immovable object, right? It's very much like two characters who are broken by the systems that they're in, right? Or one of them being like complicit in the cruelty of like the Chola kingdom or whatever, right? And again, like this is kind of stripped of the kind of the specific ideological stuff that Dilse has, but I think in its general construction, it's just it's kind of a reworking of that climax, right? And in the way that they are just totally irreconcilable as people, right? And they're not able to, but there's also this like something underneath, right? Where there's this like, what if you could live together and be together, but it can't happen and it won't happen, right? And you know, and my theory about that scene too is like, it's a scene where, yeah, Aditya Karikalan dies, but Nandini also dies in that scene too.
Yeah.
You know, in a way where what she does has broken her, right? To the point where she's a corpse in the next scene, right? She's laying like she can't do anything. Like she's so imposing and so powerful. And then you see that scene when she's in the bridge. It's like an antithesis of everything that she's been, right? And that she's projected herself as, right? And I think Ratnam is really took the grammar of that climax from Dilse and I think made it, can I say he like made it, I'm not going to say he made it better, but I'm going to say I think he kind of like used that as a kind of a framework for the visual language he uses, and I think it just works so well.
To me, the most special aspect of the scene touches on your point, Thanmye, about the two shots of Vikram and Aishwarya Rai Bachchan, which is that it feels like they've been sharing scenes together for the previous 5 odd hours of runtime. But this is really their first scene where they're sharing actual frames together. Right. Even the murder of Nandini's king / later she learns father, they're mostly in shot reverse shot. You know, think of that big imposing shot where Vikram is busting down the door.
Yeah.
And Nandini's begging him to spare the king's life. And the blood goes on the sheet opposite her, which is an incredible shot. This is really the first time in the story's runtime where they're in the same frames and the chemistry is off the charts. It's so compelling to watch them together. And think of how long we, the audience, have been held away from their union, even though this is the most tense moment of their relationship and the one that ultimately leads to their literal and figurative deaths. They're together and there's some kind of catharsis in that. It's very contradictory and compelling to watch and speaks to that same impossibility that you're labeling, Thanmye.
I think the interesting thing about the way that the scene plays out, the way that it reworks, I guess, the Dilse scene, is that the Dilse scene is about one person wants, the other person does not want it. And I don't really think you can see it as a relenting on the side of the female character in Dilse, but I think in this one it's like the death is kind of a weird expression of love. And so like, even though it is tragic for Karikalan, but I think for him, this is the best ending that he will get for himself. And Nandini doesn't want this, obviously, but like it also feels inevitable. So like there's something really strange about the tenor of the scene where the death of a big character in the thing and there is the tension, but this feels really romantic. And I think for Karikalan, this is romantic. Right? Because this is the only way for him to end this where like he is able to atone for the sins that he has committed. So I think something about that really makes the kind of scene he did is really interesting and surprising, because I expected it to be a scene about Curry Cullen's anger, but he's like laid back and he's like, I'm ready to die. And like, I think that is just a really interesting direction for the emotional stakes for the two characters and for how the actors play out the scene, right? Like Nandini, instead of being somebody who would have to say defend against an aggressive character, is actually pleading for him to not do this. And then it's just interesting, right? And like novel,
Right.
and of course it's like one of the most famous scenes in the book, right? And I think Ratnam does such a great job in like making it his own and like in his kind of style and like in the kind of emotions that he likes to play with.
It is really fascinating to think about who's actually in charge of this decision here.
Yeah.
Like if you
Yeah.
go to Aditya killing Nandini's king, that's him enacting violence with his own blade. If we want to get Freudian, you know, his phallic object. And then later on, it's his knife that he is begging Nandini to use to impale him and turn that, again, phallus-driven violence back on himself. And is it her decision? Is he kind of goading her into it? It's very thorny to pick apart.
Mhm.
And it, of course, it solves nothing. Like it ruins both of them, even though it is the poetic ending for both of them.
It's an interesting choice for Ratnam because I was reading about this scene in the book and how it's famous for being a scene in which no one knows who kills Karakallan. Like he doesn't tell you who kills him.
Yeah. There's a mystery. It's all a mystery of who killed Curry Cullen. Yeah.
It's the biggest mystery of the book. Yeah. So like the way it works is that there's a lot of people in this room. There's just a lot of people in this room. So you have Vandiyathevan, you have the guy that knocks him out, and then you have Nandini. You have, I think there's like two other characters in there who are not introduced in the story. And essentially, I think like the lights come on and Karakallan is dead.
Whoa.
Yeah, and everyone's like, who did? And that's why that guy after is like, oh, Vandiyathevan did it. Because that's the confusion. Like, no one knows who did it.
So Ratnam was really taking some liberties.
Oh,
with
100%.
this.
Yeah.
I think from a storytelling perspective, there's a pro and con to it. The pro is obviously that he gets to do what he wants to do
Icon.
in the way that he wants to do it. But then the con is that from the grandest scheme of things, like the confusion of who killed him is less confusing for the viewer. And it's harder to understand this guy that's like, oh, I'm going to go to war now. Like, he did it, right?
Yeah.
And I think you lose a bit of that sense of the grander story. And then that's why the rest of it feels a bit like strange.
Yeah.
I see. It's half committing to the change.
Yeah, but okay, but this really feels like what you said, Thanmye. It's Mani Ratnam's Ponniyin Selvan, not Tolkien's
Yeah,
Ponniyin
yeah.
Selvan.
100%. Like he can't pass this up, right? It's the toxic romance. He has to kind of lean into it. He's explored it before, and I don't think he's going to stop anytime soon. You know, like I think that he tries to do that, keep some of that mystery, but again, I think that some of that doesn't land because it's not really a mystery. Like the audience knows that it's Nandini, but could you imagine if he didn't do that scene? Like, let's, you know what I mean? Like it would just kind of, maybe it might make the people who like the book happy, but I don't think that's particularly novel cinema, right? I don't, you know what I mean? It's
Novel cinema.
yes. Yeah, I could talk about so many things, like the way, you know, even just the choice of like when he like goes to the lamps and turns them off, and like it happens in the dark where Nandini, where he's like, is it easier if you don't see me? And it, you know, because Nandini's always weaponized her beauty, right? And then it really strips her of her strength, right? It's just kind of this like specific blocking decision that adds another layer to it, right? And you know, and the thing that I was thinking about too is like, you know, there's a dialogue that Curry Cullen says, which is happiness and peace elude those who hate themselves. He says that to Nandini, and I think it gets to like the core of like what I love about this movie so much is that a lot of Ratnam cinema is about looking into people, right? And like, you know, we've covered like other Indian filmmakers, you know, like Rajamouli or whatever. Like usually with him, it's like you look up to them, you look up to your protagonist, right? But with Ratnam, there's something there where it's like there's always like it's like you don't really see Curry Cullen for his valor throughout these two movies. You see him for his pain, right? You look into him and you try to understand who he is, and then that's a real gamble in your 2-part epic, right? It's brave, it's bold, it's something that a lesser filmmaker wouldn't think of doing, right? It's like it's because Ratnam is somebody, and we know this, is somebody who like challenges his viewers, right? And like, and sometimes sometimes maybe that doesn't result in the best kind of audience satisfaction, but I think it's necessary in like the popular format. Is I respect whenever a filmmaker is able to challenge your viewer and not just give them a whatever, like a scene of valor or whatever, when they break these people down into their bare elements and then shows you what these bare elements are and then what happens when they coincide, right? And
Yeah.
I think it's like it's a brave scene to do, especially in the kind of subversion of the novel too. It's like it's why I respect him so much. It's why I think he's like he's the GOAT. He's like goated, you know? You know, like it's like
up with the sauce.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like Rajamouli and Ratnam could not be like farther from each other in filmmaking. Like
Totally.
in what interests them in filmmaking. It's crazy when people try to pit them. Well, yeah, okay, yes. There are people that try to pit them against each other, but they're both operating in wildly different spheres and have
like
varying different
Rajamouli's about physical battlefields and Ratnam's about emotional battlefields, right? Like that's his whole like why is it that the scenes of people talking to each other invest us more than the actual action sequences in those? I mean, not to say that they aren't good. I mean, I think they're fine, but it's like the stuff that really grabs us is like this scene. Like, what are we talking about? We're talking about the Mandakini death scene. We're talking about the Aditya Kari Collins scene, like scenes that are just people talking, but he blocks and kind of puts it together in such an engaging way, right? And I think that's like one of the hallmarks of why he's such a brilliant filmmaker, I think, in my humble opinion. So
I think like the fact that the film is kind of like almost marketed as an action movie is a bit of a disservice to it, because those are maybe the least interesting scenes. And the most interesting scenes are the scenes of people talking. And I would say that like this subversion of novel, like a lesser filmmaker would have tried to adhere as much as possible to the novel. And I think that compromise is a thing that Ratnam doesn't do. And yes, I do say that there are some cons to subverting the novel in this way, but you have to take some hits to make the hits. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So
ooh, put that on a t-shirt.
I think because he knows, okay, I need to give up a little bit of something so that I can do this thing really, really well. And if you kind of just split the difference, then you end up with mid, right? And so he makes those choices. And when you know that, then there's a choice. There is a choice. It's not a choice of compromise. It's a choice to elevate a scene or to elevate a portion or a point of the story. And I think that's the thing that Ratnam does, you know, like he goes for it. He goes for broke. And like sometimes it might not be the best plan on paper, but like at least maybe that scene works, you know, for the one movie. I don't know. But I think you see that. And so you see that he makes a choice. And the fact that he's working in a blockbuster mode as well and doing that is impressive.
Everyone's spitting bars.
Pithy slogans abound, my dude.
I mean, that's why my number for this movie is so high. It's like, you know, it's not a perfect film. And I don't think Ratnam is interested in perfect films anymore, right? You know, in his career, he's open to the imperfection of it. Like, you know, when he, you know, in this interview he was giving, he was talking about how the visual language, he wanted it to be intentionally imperfect, right? So I don't think he's going after the perfect cinema anymore, right? It's about like what he can achieve from moment to moment, you know, sometimes. And I mean, I guess that's why I gave this movie 5 stars, because it's like, to me, it's like, yeah, it has its flaws and, you know, I can acknowledge them, but there are so many sequences and stretches in this film that are so like, that wouldn't have been done, you know, that we wouldn't be able to see had it not been Mani Ratnam wanting to make this film. You know what I mean? It's there's just so much incredible filmmaking that I'm just like, yeah, fuck it, 5 stars. You know? You know, it's just one of those things.
I mean, that's the best 5 stars. Those are the best 5 stars to get. I want to talk about the like one shot, and I don't really know whether it's just me going crazy, but like he does these really close like 3 shots and 2 shots. And when you know the siblings meet in the temple, and there's a 3 shot.
The succession shot.
Oh, is that what we're calling it? I don't remember, but
Succession,
anyway.
Also known as Ponniyin Selvan New York edition.
But I was like wondering, how do you do this shot? Because they're all in focus, but like it looks really shallow. I was very confused. I was like, how do you do this from a technical level? How does this lens work? This lens disobeying physics right now, because like it looks so shallow, but everyone's like in a different plane but is in focus. I feel like they're doing something.
It's such an incredible shot.
Yeah.
And they're all in close up, and the way they're all their faces are in frame.
And I love that it's just one shot, right? It's just one take, and then they're just talking, and it's just like actors acting.
And the blocking in the scene too. It's like when they're embracing, and then when and then I think Aditya says he's going to go to Kadambur. Both the siblings go to one side, and then Aditya's on the other side. It's like the specifics of blocking within the kind of the static shot itself is so like it's brilliant. It's great.
Yeah. Oh my God. And that whole section in the Buddhist temple, I think, just looks gorgeous. Very, very, very great camera work from Ravi Varma and Ratnam.
Maybe to get into like the camera work in this, like Eli, I think you mentioned something about you feeling that the visual language is a little more crystallized, or the film looks a little better now. I was wondering if you could expand on that. Like, what did you kind of mean by that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think in particular, the use of natural light feels more natural. I remember it feeling a little bit plasticky at times in the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
There are still some shots that have fake fire torches, and I know that there were more of them in the first movie, and that really stuck out to me as something that felt cheapening. And there are still some here, but they're fewer. Maybe if I looked back, it wouldn't be so significant of a difference, but I remember just thinking that the light felt more organic this time around in particular. That's less on camera blocking than cinematography and gaffing, I suppose.
I also think that Ravi Varman took it up a notch here. I think not just for like kind of specific stuff like that, but I also think because of the emotional drive that this part has, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more to kind of motivate the camera work here, right? It's, you know, like Ben was talking about the siblings reuniting and how that feeling like relief and, you know, kind of getting that moment of intimacy with the three of them. And, you know, and just like, even just like the, that one shot where Sundarachola is talking about Mandakini, and then you have that overhead that starts to turn. That is a callback to, I don't know, Wilson, maybe you noticed this, but that's a callback to the shot in Iruvar where Prakash Raj is in that movie, where in there, I think the context is a little different, where he's kind of waxing poetic about like romance and stuff. And then here, Ratnam uses a similar shot, but I think towards another goal, right? Towards regret and communicating like the sins of the father and like how they pass down and like, you know, that type of stuff. And I think that there's a lot more emotional drive motivating the camera work here. Even just like those like close-ups of Mandakini's death in the Mandakini death scene is, you know, they're so pristine and they're so intimate, but they're also so, there's just more going on, I think, on the emotional level that just like automatically lifts up the language.
It's so great that Ratnam is able to set that Sundarachola and Mandakini thing basically in this film and then pay it off so emotionally like punchy just within this one part. And like prime example of melodrama just too late kind of moment, like hitting you in the fucking guts. And I think that scene is incredible. Like the way he sets up the three different parties in this scene, right? You have Sundarachola, you have Mandakini, and you have the people that are trying to kill Sundarachola, and how they all slowly come together, and those curtains blowing in the wind, another one, wind, and it's, oh my God. And just that moment where you realize she's the one that's getting shot is, it really just, everyone like stopped breathing in my theater. It was just incredible.
Yeah, it's just the general blocking of that scene, and just like the close-ups through the kind of the cloth, and then like kind of Sundarachola trying to figure out who it is, and then he realizes it's the person he was just talking about. And it's, you know, it's another thing too. It's like Mandakini died out of love, and then Nandini, did she meet the same fate? I don't know. I think, you know, it's interesting, like mother and daughter too, right? It's like Mandakini did sacrifice herself out of love, right? But Nandini was just driven by anger, right? Or but then there's also, I think, a case to be made that this is also like where love can take you, right? And, you know, it's interesting, right? Like, you know, what's so interesting about this is like there are 3 different scenes of women holding swords threatening men, but they're also vastly different, right? you know?
The Kundavai one is so good as well. I love that one.
Yeah.
That's a great scene.
That one is just like playful romance.
That's so sexy as well. Fuck.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. I mean that's like the testament to like what Ratnam can do. Like he can take like these basic elements of like, oh, I'm gonna point a sword at this person, but towards totally different ends, right? And towards totally different effects and block it and stage it in such diversely different ways. Yeah, that scene with Kundavaya and Vandiyathevan is great. I was just like, it's like creating tension, but it's also like a sexy tension. Yeah. So yeah.
Sexy tension. Oh,
It's another scene with a phallic object.
Yeah, it is.
Where he
Freud, where are
slowly
you?
puts his hands and like gets closer to the shaft of the sword.
it's there. It's right there.
Yeah, but you could argue that that's like a very, in a Freudian sense, like male form of violence that women are being forced into because of how tense things are and how crummily the men are acting. I don't know. Maybe we don't need to dig too far into that Freud territory, but I think it is there. Never mind.
Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe.
Maybe.
I'll back away from that one.
Let's put it as a theory for now.
Yeah.
And even in like, I feel like the small moments, right? Like those small scenes, like when Vandiyathevan gets captured and then Nandini's like looking at him from above and she's having that conversation as she like circles around him and the camera sort of turns as she turns and turns with him as I think it's just really, really simple, small things that he does with the camera here that I'm like you deserve to be called one of the best filmmakers in the world because
the way he uses direct POV in this is like super interesting. Like that scene, also even just like the beginning of the Karikal and Nandini scene where Karikal looks at her through the kind of the aperture of the wall. And, you get this, and it's these shots of her being just like ethereal. You see it through his eyes, right? It's like the light and everything is making her look so beautiful. And you really get into that headspace, right? So immediately with these like direct POV stuff.
Yeah. And honestly, like I'm sort of happy that Raman is doing more like background scoring here as opposed to PS1 where there was like really set musical numbers that sort of just took me out a little bit more.
That's a good point.
Which is sort of sucky to say because I sort of think that his musical numbers usually add so much, but him choosing to maybe not take a step back, but to like score a lot more in this was honestly a really, really good choice and just like allowed Ratnam's like direction and like the story flow to just keep on going a lot smoother for me personally.
Yeah, I agree. I think even just like I know you were talking about Wilson last time that it felt like in Chekativantavanam he was using the songs as score, right? Effectively. And I think he brings that back here, right? Where, like the first 3 songs play in the opening flashback. Right.
Yeah.
And it feels like they add so much, right?
They do.
Really Veera Raja plays when he's going off to war, right? And then the Chinanjira Nilave, which is like the not reprised version that plays during the confrontation scene, but like the actual love song that plays between them, like plays there, and then you get the reprise later when when the stab happens, which is like a great kind of use of background music, right? And how to kind of it's like just how you use music to just like twist and kind of change like where things have gone, right? Again, I really do need to spend more time with the film because sometimes I like talk about it and I'm like, but there's like more and that I feel like hasn't fully kind of registered with me sometimes. And maybe that's just like whatever, like the function of like talking about a new release where like people are still trying to process everything. But yeah, I think the music in this is really, really good.
Is there anything in particular, Thanmye, that you're going to look for on your next rewatch?
I don't know. I think it's just to pay attention to the smaller moments. And sometimes, like, I think when I watch, especially with the 2 PS films, there's like the watch where you pay attention to like the visual language and then the watch where you pay attention to the dialogues. At least for me, because I'm not a native Tamil speaker, so I rely on the subtitles. So I think the next time I watch it, it might just be like an all-encompassing thing where it's like, I'll pay a little more attention to what they're saying, and maybe like pay attention to the smaller moments. Because I remember like I saw the movie 2 different times already, and then the second time I noticed that like, I mean, I know we kind of talked about like Ratnam's action scenes not really being kind of what he's focused on, but I gotta say, I think the interval sequence in this is really good. Like, I think that's a really solid set piece. And I think the second time I watched it, I was really paying attention to the way he kind of cuts between the different lines of action and how he kind of blocks that whole scene out. And I think it's like, the thing is like, he's not staging, because like you see the approach that he's trying to take. It's like he's trying to put you in the action. Because I think action filmmaking now has taken kind of people are starting to prefer like the omniscient observer type of stuff where it's like everything has to be clear, and I think that has its own merits and stuff, which is fine. But I think Ratnam's approach is totally different. He's just not staging action like Rajamouli. That's the basic thing, right? It's like he's not going for that kind of omniscient observer thing, which, some people might resonate with, some people might not. But I think the second time I watched it, I was like, oh, like this interval sequence is it's pretty well done, even though like, I don't know. I think in terms of its staging and blocking, in terms of like its larger, the way he has like the different parties meet and how he cuts between the lines of action, I thought it was pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, the movement in those action scenes comes more from the cut than from camera movement or actor movement. But that also lends an interesting kind of perspective to it.
Do you, Thanmye, know what Ratnam has his eyes on next? Do you know, like, once he's completed both PSs, what's next for him?
So he confirmed he's doing a film with Kamal Hassan, who's like this kind of multi-hyphenate actor out of the Tamil film industry. He made Nayagan, which was his like big kind of film that came out in the late 80s, I think. That was just like kind of changed Tamil cinema, basically the grammar of Tamil cinema at the time. And they're reuniting for the second time, so everyone's obviously like super excited. There's not a lot of details about it.
Is it going to be historical?
People don't know, but there's a speculation that it's going to be like a spy film because at the time, apparently, when Ratnam was pitching, like when he wanted to work with Kamal, like he pitched 2 different scripts. The first one was a spy film, and the other one was Nayagan, what ended up becoming Nayagan. So people are thinking that they're going to finally make that spy film because Ratnam has also like expressed interest in making a straight action movie. So like, we'll see what he comes up with. Though again, it might not be that. It might be something a little more interesting. I personally would want something a little more challenging than that. That's just my perspective, unless he comes with something interesting within that. But even if it's like a challenging spy film, I think I'm down. That seems cool.
That's awesome. I really can't wait. Honestly, like after this, I feel like Ratnam is still like firing on all cylinders. So I just want to see how he operates with a story of a smaller scale and a story that is fully his own as well.
Oh yeah. Where he's not burdened by like being like
a source material.
Right.
Yeah. And I just know that he has it in him to like hit many more out of the park. Like I feel it. I feel it from this film.
We should have to wait too long.
It's going to be next year. We're going to be back pretty soon.
He's our most consistent deep cut filmmaker.
At least according to the announcement, that it's going to come out next year. So he could be like pre-production starting to shoot soon. Who knows?
This guy's working, man.
Except for Koreeda. We've just not been consistent with Koreeda.
No, but
with Broker.
Bro Joker.
Yeah, it'll be cool to see what he does. Yeah, I don't know what he'll do. It's kind of crazy because it's like the dude's been working for 40 years. He made his first movie 40 years ago, I think, as of this year. And he had his biggest commercial success with the PS films, right? Like it's like at what? He's almost 70 now, It's like, or is he? Yeah, he's like in his mid 60s actually. But yeah, it's like, who can say that? Like after this long, it's like, a lot of people don't really last and are able to keep up, and still like deliver stuff like this. I think in an interview he was like, this is like the toughest project I've ever had to do. And I think to have the guts to be able to mount something like this in your 60s when you've had like multiple heart attacks trying to like make movies. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but he's like multiple times when trying to like on set, he's had heart attacks. It's crazy. Like I think
take care of yourself. Oh my God.
He hasn't had one in a long time, which is good. But but like when he was making Ravanan, which I think Ben and Wilson, you both have seen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a heart attack while making that movie, which I get because it's like kind of crazy how that movie looks and everything.
I mean, jungle film. My God.
Yeah.
Wait,
Oh
I was gonna compare that to Martin Sheen having a heart attack on the set of Apocalypse Now.
Yeah. There's something about the jungle. Very
Film in the
stressful.
jungle shoot.
But I hope
film.
he, knock on wood, and I hope he continues to like make amazing films for the foreseeable future. And I feel like there's certain filmmakers, and I feel like I've told this to you guys, that I just like I get kind of defensive about. Definitely Ratnam is one of them. But I don't know. There's just something about his mastery of the craft that's like so inspiring to me personally. I don't know what it is, and I've been trying to think about it, like, in terms of the filmmakers that I kind of go towards. Like Ratnam is like the one guy that I've always been like, I have to go catch his next movie 100%, and and it's like I have to be there that weekend. And there's value to that. It's like in terms of like when there's a filmmaker that you're so drawn to that you want to be there that first weekend or whatever. And I guess even I think artistically, right? Like there's the filmmakers that you admire, like their craft and everything, but they don't really impact your art or whatever. But then there's other filmmakers that you looked up to them as role models, and like they impact very much how you consume other art and how you create your own art too. That right. I think Ratnam is that guy for me, which is like, yeah, strange because I only like discovered him while in college, where other filmmakers I've known for a while and have been watching for a while. So yeah.
Thanmye, thank you so much for coming on again and sharing with us your perspective and deep connection to Mani Ratnam and his work, and talking about Ponniyin Selvan Part 2 with us today.
Yeah, thank you guys. I mean, I know we've all had our different perspectives on everything, but I'm sure I've definitely convinced you guys he's somebody to look out for, at least.
Of course.
Oh, for sure, Thanmye. No question.
I knew that years ago.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, always happy to talk. And again, like next time, either we're doing that Christopher Nolan Tenet episode.
Oh, I feel like we might miss the boat on that. We gotta rush on that.
Oh yeah, wait. Are we trying to hit Oppenheimer time?
Well, we could do a late Oppenheimer. We could do second half of the year.
That movie is not going to be as anti-nuclear as it thinks it is.
Okay, Eli.
This is I'm placing money down.
We don't know yet.
We'll see. We
know from that trailer. Explosions are cool, bro. Bropenheimer.
Okay. I have to actually watch the trailer. I mean, I have to.
I haven't seen it as well.
Or you have to bring me on where I get to be full ass hater Thanmye. Because I've definitely been hater Thanmye to you, like personally, but not on the podcast. It's a different level, and I think like I said, Trey Edward Schultz. You can talk about Burning one day. I'm happy to come on and talk about Burning.
I feel like we're more likely to do Lee Chang-dong than we are to do Trey Edward Schultz.
Interesting.
Okay, bring me on for the Burning. I have things to say.
Ooh, I want to hear that.
Oh, or don't. It's fine. Like maybe
Who else?
Yeah, give your hit list.
My hit list. Oh God.
Well, we could have had you on for RRR. I think that would have been very interesting.
See, the thing with RRR was like, I think I listened to that podcast and you guys basically covered everything I was gonna say. So I feel like you guys did a great job with that, like just covering the kind of the political stuff and everything. So there's really not much I could have added to, frankly saying. But who's my hit list? I don't know. In my mind, right now it's like, I think that I've come on and I've like said so many great things about all the movies we've talked about that we've been on together. I'm like, I gotta hate at least once on this podcast. I gotta hear Thanmye.
We got to give you the chance to hate.
Yes.
What if we did an Oppenheimer Barbie double episode? Not like double episode, just like an episode where we talk about both movies.
Say which one's better.
Oh yeah.
This is such a weird episode, but okay.
That would be
Wow.
cool. I mean, I've already planned like a double feature with friends, so I'm seeing it the same day, like already. We planned it a year out, so.
Oh, wow.
So it's it's on the horizon. It's possible.
Wait, Thanmye, you do not like Luca Guadagnino, right?
Oh God.
Oh yeah, I don't like him at all. Yeah, I think he's not good.
That could be an interesting episode.
Eli, you're just like getting him on your side.
I'm trying to stoke the flames.
I know that the potential Suspiria episode is going to be Eli's like. Dude, we'll see a side of Eli we've never seen. Truly like elite hater Eli. which I'm very excited about that if that ever happens. But yeah, now I have to kind of rack my brain, but like right now what's coming to mind is Trey Edward Schultz and Burning. I can't speak to any of Lee Chang-dong's other stuff because I haven't seen it, but yeah.
He's an interesting filmmaker. He really treads the line.
Or if we talk about Sam Levinson, I'm down.
Oh, God.
I don't want to fucking talk about Sam Levinson, man.
He's not worth the airspace at all. He's not worth the time on the air. Yeah.
People need to stop giving that man fucking money. People need to stop.
But he is a co-writer on Deep Water. Certified great movie, Deep Water.
Deep Water's good. I watched it. Like I was just
yes.
I like Deep Water. It's trashy. It's like so trashy.
Yes,
but it's fine. It's good.
But it knows what it is.
It knows what it is.
A lot smarter than it lets on.
Yeah. Well, it's Adrian Lane. I think Adrian Lane. He like did all those like erotic thrillers from the 90s. Right?
Yeah, he did.
It's like it's just that, but like bad, but also good. Like
Eli's so happy right now.
Oh my God.
He's been looking for someone to get in the water with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's
come on in. The water's fine.
It's good. It's like Hulu. Great Hulu film to watch.
Yeah.
Hulu film, like that's a thing. Like, that's the kind of film. Like it's a genre.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Should we close it out?
Let's do it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Deep Cut. Please rate and review because that helps us keep making the show. Be sure to subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our next episode drops. And you can keep up with Deep Cut on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd at Deep Cut Pod. And you can also join us to talk about movies on our Discord server, to which you'll find a link in the description. And thank you to Justina Yan for our beautiful artwork.
I'm Wilson.
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli.
And I'm Thanmye.
Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time.
This one, however, did not have the bop that is Nandini versus Kundavai from the first one.
The banger.